The October chill has set up in the eastern half of the United States, and we are tracking two big storms for this upcoming work week. Plus, we have a system we're watching down in the tropics. Let's dive right into the details next at the Weather Farm. As we begin on our Tuesday, we are watching an area of low pressure that is centered across the Great Lakes. It is spreading rain across the UP and northern parts of Michigan, back across northern Minnesota into far parts of eastern Manitoba. We are seeing that snow mixed with rain, but from the Rockies through the east coast and into the northeast, it is high pressure dominating the weather pattern for our Tuesday. The exception being here in the southeast, where in parts of Mississippi we could see a stray shower or two, as well as parts of Florida as the daytime heating continues. By Wednesday, we watched that trough continue to dig into the eastern half of the United States, bringing northwesterly winds, and those winds could be strong, as evidenced here by the tightening of those isobars. So the closer the lines are together, the stronger the wind is going to be. So we're going to see winds gusting 30 to 40 miles per hour across parts of Michigan, Illinois, through Ohio for our Wednesday. Out across the west, we have that high pressure, that ridge building across the Rockies, but just offshore, and we're going to be talking about this as we get later in the week, we are watching yet another atmospheric river aim its target towards British Columbia for the end of this week. And we have some scattered showers across the northeast in association with that low pressure system as it continues to move off to the east. As I mentioned, we have that trough in the jet stream diving across the eastern half of the United States. That's dropped temperatures 20 to 30 degrees since our weekend highs, and that pattern is going to continue for most of this week while we watch a ridge form across the western half. But we see a little trough here ejecting out of the Four Corners region. That's going to move into the Central Plains as we get later in the week and provide the southern, south central states a chance of precipitation. And here's that next system making its way onshore by the time we get to Saturday with that atmospheric river. And it is that system that we're going to be watching early next week for the threat of severe weather anywhere from Kansas to Minnesota through Kentucky. And the details are still to be ironed out, but it's something we're going to be keeping a close eye on over the next several days. So let's put everything into motion. As it begins on our Tuesday, that system continues to sit and spin. It's going to bring locally heavy amounts of rain to the UP and northern parts of Michigan. Starts to spreading rain toward the northeast, and then on the British Columbia coast, we start to see that atmospheric river start to take shape. Here's that low pressure system bringing snow to the higher elevations of Colorado by the time we get to Thursday and Friday, and out ahead of it across Oklahoma through Texas and Louisiana, we're going to see heavy rain by the time we get to Thursday and Friday. And it's going to pump a lot of moisture from the Gulf. So we're going to be talking about heavy amounts of rainfall for this part of the country. In terms of our highs for our Tuesday, we're going to have that cooler flow moving from the northwest to the southeast. 40s across the Dakotas and Minnesota, 50s and 60s through the Ohio Valley into the northeast. The real warmth, the 80s that we saw in the Ohio Valley over the weekend, those are pushed well far to the south, down through Florida, southern Georgia, even into Texas. You're going to be hard-pressed to find 90-degree high temperatures for your Tuesday. As we go into Wednesday, more of the same with that cooler air really taking hold. Parts of Wisconsin could struggle to get out of the 40s for your Wednesday afternoon highs. We're already starting to see a slight rebound in temperatures across the Dakotas into Montana with highs in the 50s and 60s for our Wednesday. And as we get to Thursday, we still have that northwesterly flow across the eastern half of the United States, keeping temperatures about 5 to 10 degrees cooler than normal for most of this area. 80s well down to the south, but we start to see that ridge starting to build as we saw in our jet stream map as we get toward the end of this week. Across the Intermountain West, temperatures are in the 50s and 60s. Southern California, you're in the 70s and 80s for your Thursday. I mentioned with that low pressure system spinning across the Great Lakes Tuesday into Wednesday, it's going to provide localized areas of 1 to 2 inches of rainfall from the northern parts of Michigan to the UP. Elsewhere, we're going to see light amounts across southern Michigan and Wisconsin and northern Ohio, generally less than 1/4 of an inch of rainfall. And what's really driving this is the 500 millibar map here. We have that trough in the eastern half of the United States. We have a ridge building across the Rockies. There's that system moving onshore into California. That's going to eject out through the Four Corners region, provide the impetus for those severe weathers Thursday into Friday and out across British Columbia. As we get to Friday morning, we watch that atmospheric river start to take aim on British Columbia and eventually the Pacific Northwest. And it is that system, as it makes its way through the Rockies into the Central Plains early next week, that could provide the next round of severe weather for the United States. A lot's going to be monitored over the next several days, because where the low pressure tracks in relation to the jet stream and where the center of that low ejects out as it moves into the Central Plains is going to be key into the strength and intensity. So we'll have more on this in a later forecast, but I wanted you to be aware that there are some significant changes happening as we get towards the last week of October with our weather. But coming back to this week, we watched that heavy rain here Thursday, Friday, even into Saturday as that storm continues to make its way through Texas into Louisiana. We could have some high school football games impacted Friday night, even some college football games on Saturday. But out in the Pacific Northwest, we're going to watch heavy amounts of precipitation, which could lead to some heavy amounts of mountain snow. And those coastal regions of British Columbia into Washington, you're going to receive heavy amounts of rainfall as we get through the weekend. And here's that system that we're going to be watching, where it sets up here in the Central Plains. By the time we get to Monday and Tuesday of next week, the models are still trying to figure this out. There have been a little bit of variation over the last 24 hours. But as we get closer, as we get new model data, we're going to continue to watch this system as it ejects out of the Rockies. And typically this time of the year, we get a lot of Lee cyclogenesis with storms that come over the Rockies. They drop down, the air descends as they come down the Rockies. So we get these strong systems spinning up in West Kansas. And then depending upon where the upper level low and the mid-level lows are tracking, that will help determine the intensity of the storm. So a lot to watch and monitor over the next 48 to 72 hours with this storm. But going into our weekend, it's going to be a nice fall weekend across the eastern half of the United States with temperatures generally in the 50s, some 40s in upstate New York, 70s down across the Tennessee Valley and across the Carolinas, 80s out across Texas. Even out in the deserts, you're cooling down into the 80s and 90s for your Friday high temperatures. By the time we get to Saturday, we see that ridge building across the Central Plains, sending temperatures well into the 70s and 80s into the Dakotas. That's just a sign as this next system moves on shore and interacts with this warmer weather, where we're going to see the setup for that intense weather as we begin next week. And as we go Sunday, 80s start to move into handle of Texas, 70s through Nebraska and Kansas, still through the Great Lakes of the Ohio Valley into the Northeast. We are cool for this time of the year. Temperatures here in the 40s and 50s, but look out across the northern Rockies. In those higher elevations into the Sierras, into the Blackfoot Mountains, into near Yellowstone, temperatures here are being kept down into the 40s and 50s for your afternoon highs. In terms of our precipitation, liquid precipitation over the next 6 days, with that system that's going to move onshore to California by Thursday, through the Four Corners region and into the South Central Plains, Texas, Louisiana, by the time we get to the weekend, we're going to see heavy rainfall. Through the Great Lakes, this is associated with that low pressure system as it spins Tuesday and Wednesday and eventually makes its way to the Northeast. Again, amounts will generally be less than an inch, but we will see isolated amounts greater than 1 inch. But with that next atmospheric river making its way into British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest, we could see rainfall amounts there exceeding 6 to 8 inches, especially in British Columbia. And as we get in those higher elevations with those mountains, we're talking feet of snow with this system. So let's break it down region by region. Here in the South Central Plains, as we go from Beaumont, Texas, through just north of Lafayette, we're going to see rainfall. Here we could see a band of 4 to 6 inches of rain, elsewhere generally 2 to 4 inches across most of eastern Texas, through central and southern Louisiana, even making its way through central Mississippi. As we make our way up through Oklahoma, this is also an area we could see heavy amounts of rainfall. 2 to 4 inches are likely, with isolated areas up to 6 inches of rain likely. And as we go into the Pacific Northwest, across British Columbia, 4 to 8 inches of liquid precipitation is going to be likely by the time we get to our Sunday morning. Obviously, in the mountainous regions, higher elevation, this is going to be measured in several feet of snow. But as we get down into Washington State, down through Oregon, even into Northern California along the coast, 2 to 4 inches of rain is not out of the question as that atmospheric river takes its aim to the Pacific Northwest. As we move inland, though, rainfall amounts will be slightly less, generally less than 1/2 inch, except in those higher elevations where we could see snowfall exceeding 1 to 2 feet of snow across parts of Idaho. I do want to jump down to the tropics. We are watching an area of high likelihood of development here just south and west of Puerto Rico and the Dominican. This has a 90% chance of development over the next 48 hours and will likely become Tropical Storm Melissa by the time we get to our Tuesday afternoon. We can see here on our satellite image, we watch the storm developing over the weekend as it makes its way towards the Leeward Islands. And as it moves south of Puerto Rico, we start to see it get developed here on Monday evening at the time of this recording. So we're going to continue to watch this as it continues to move towards the west at about 15 knots. There it has a pretty solid development of a core system. Core of thunderstorms, so we're going to continue to watch it for further development on our Tuesday into Wednesday. Where it will go, that's the big question. One set of models wants to take it generally due west for the next 24 hours, but then the models start to diverge. They do keep it on that west-northwesterly track till about 48 or 72 hours, and then by about the time we get to Thursday or Friday, most models do want to spin it towards the north, eventually over parts of western Cuba or the eastern Dominican and Haiti, and then we're going to turn it back out across the Atlantic. So that's something we're going to watch. But as you can see, there are some models that really race it across the Caribbean, even 72 hours from now, have it much further west than the consensus of the models do here. So then we look at the ensemble map, and this is a run of about 51 different models. And so you can see there's wide variety of paths and locations for this system. But the consensus of all the models is it will continue on this westerly path for the next 24 to 48 hours. Then turn towards the northwest, skirt eastern Cuba by the time we get to our weekend, and then eventually make its way out. How strong will this system get? Well, that's still an area of discussion as well. Most models do have it strengthening to a tropical storm within the next 24 to 48 hours, and keeping it at that intensity through 96 hours. So that's going to take us to Friday and Saturday. And that's the time it's going to be moving over the land of Cuba, eastern Cuba, interacting with a lot of those mountain regions, and really not finding itself in a favorable area of development. But once it gets back over those open waters, we have about half the models that do want to strengthen it as it moves away from the United States and northeast into the Atlantic into a Category 1 hurricane. And the other half of the models do want to keep that intensity a little bit lower. So this is still about 5 to 7 days away. A lot can change. We're going to continue to watch and see how this system develops over the next 48 to 2 hours, and we'll bring you the latest on any developments with what could be Tropical Storm Melissa in our next video. Jumping back closer to home, looking at our temperatures over the next 8 to 14 days, the eastern half of the United States, where you are enjoying those fall-like temperatures for this week, you're going to be near normal from the Ohio Valley through the southeast. Florida, you're actually going to be below normal for your temperatures, above normal temperatures across the northern tier, which leads to the likelihood that we're not going to see much in the way of snowfall as we begin the new month across the northern tier of the United States. Out across the southwest, temperatures are expected to be above normal during the next 8 to 14 days. Where we are going to see is probably a lot of cold rain, especially across the northeast into the northern tier, where we expect to see above normal precipitation for the next 8 to 14 days, and that precipitation extends down into the southeast, into the Carolinas, through Florida. Texas, where you're under the gun for that heavy rainfall this coming weekend, take advantage of it, because after that it looks to turn much drier across Texas, Oklahoma as we close out the month of October and begin November. And out in the Pacific Northwest, we are what is going to be a series of atmospheric rivers that will impact the weather in your area, producing above normal precipitation as we begin the month of November. And speaking of November, the Climate Prediction Center has gone ahead and issued its monthly temperature outlook for the month of November. Most of the southern tier of the United States expected to be above normal, and that above normal temperatures will extend up through Nebraska, Missouri, through Wyoming and Colorado. So we're really not going to see probably a lot in the way of early month November snowstorms across the Rockies. As we get toward the later parts of November, that can definitely change, but we're going to see equal chances of above or below normal temperatures across the northern tier through the Ohio Valley into the northeast. And in terms of our precipitation, it is going to be very wet across the Pacific Northwest, through the Dakotas into Minnesota, down through the Corn Belt. Hopefully you're able to get your crops harvested over the next few weeks before we get to November and the heavier amounts of precipitation take their impact on the Central Plains. Out across the Four Corners region through West Texas, below normal precipitation, and out towards the southeast and the Carolinas, we're expecting below normal precipitation for your month of November. Well, we thank you for joining us here at the Weather Farm for your Tuesday. We hope you have a great day. Go ahead and drop a comment down in the comment section. What's going on with the weather in your area? Are the crops being harvested? Have you seen your first frost or freeze? Have you seen snowflakes? We'd like to know what you're seeing in your area. Go ahead and drop that down there. Hit that bell notification icon so you can be notified when we have a new video available, and we will see you soon here at the Weather Farm.